memories of the good old days, right here, right now, in front of our faces. Special times and sacred spaces. This is the shape of it. This is the way it is.
Oxford Castaway series was a 10-year series that appeared in Oxfordshire Limited Edition, in which I sent interesting people from town, gown and county onto my mythological island of Oxtopia, and they were allowed to take with them some inspirational objects. Now, the series ended in 2017, and soon after that, a short video was made. Oxford Castaways began 10 years ago when I came up with the idea of a mythological island called Oxtopia, and I had a cunning plan to send inspirational people with links to Oxford to the island. I suppose it's like Desert Island Discs without the music. I tell the life stories of the castaways, and I let them take works of art, objects and books to the island. But it also has 6 stories from key workers at Sobel House. The reason for that is that this book is being sold on behalf of the hospice.
Sobel House cares for people at the end of their life. We've been doing this for 40 years, and we are very aware of an increasing need for good quality end-of-life care in the county. In October, Sobel House will start building a new Sobel clinic and new garden annex, which is going to be particularly dedicated to people who have dementia.
In this book, you'll find castaways from 5 continents. Icoline Smith from Jamaica, Yasmin Robson from Guyana, Nancy Hunt from Kenya and Chulele from China. I could go on, but I'd much rather you bought a copy of the book and that way supported Sobel House. Now, the final castaway actually was me, and so that's the only one that wasn't written by me, and actually wasn't chosen by me, it was chosen by the editor. Now, the history of Oxford is not just about the buildings, but it's about the people, including yourselves, because your passions and interests inform the spirit of the city. I expect you spend a lot of your time taking tourists around colleges and institutions of Oxford University. But there is an Oxford beyond the colleges. And when you come out from this lockdown, you may want to rethink a few tours for local people and perhaps even venture into St Thomas's, the old industrial area of Oxford. Now, one of the most iconic buildings there, Cooper's Oxford Marmalade Factory, was in the final Castaway story because for 10 years I ran an art and antique centre there, and with my business partner I renamed it as the Gem Factory, and the name seems to have stuck. You'll see in the pictures that it's not just about a building, it's about the people. Our sublease was not renewed after 10 years, and so some of the dealers set up a shoot shop in High Street called Antiques on High, and a few of them I cast away together on Oxtopia. You may be interested in the whole world of art and antiques in Oxford. If you are, you'd probably like my second novel, Sculpting the Elephant, which is set in Jericho in India, but the Gem Factory makes an appearance. And also the Jericho Tavern, where another castaway, Colin Greenwood, and his fellow musicians of Radiohead were talent spotted and broke on the world. Now, we can now move to the east side of Oxford, the most culturally diverse part of our city, where in 1954, town and gown were united. I interviewed Sir Roger Bannister for the Castaway series, just before he started to work on his memoir. And he titled his memoir Twin Tracks. And if you read it, I think you'll find that you really get inside his head before he was about to try to break the 4-minute mile. And it was by no means certain that he would be able to do it. Now, Sir Roger was also a neurologist. So his chosen object to go onto Oxtopia was a Victorian phrenology head. And that is a kind of quackish forerunner of his science. Now, Sir Roger was also the first chair of the Sports Council. And I think a lot of people don't realise that he laid the foundations to what was our great achievement in 2012 at the London Olympics. Under him, 500 swimming pools were built, lots of and playing fields were opened in not prosperous areas. And also, Margaret Thatcher sent for him and said that really she didn't want the United Kingdom to send a team to Moscow for political reasons. And he politely declined. And of course, one of the athletes who made his name at that Olympics was called Sebastian Coe. And of course, he went on to run the 2012 Olympics. Sir Roger was the warden of Pembroke College when a job came up, the Vice Chancellor of Oxford University, and he was offered the job. But he politely refused that too. And what he said then was, Pembroke needs me more. And under him, there is a building maybe some of you will know on the Grand Point side of the river, which is the accommodation block for Pembroke College, which was built under him. Now, Sir Roger, the Chancellor of Oxford University, Lord Chris Patten of Barnes, and the former Chancellor of Oxford Brookes University, Sharmi Chakrabarti, are among my famous castaways. But I do believe even the famous ones would not like to be called celebrities. I think they would be delighted if you as tour guides called them people who achieved something. I think I should start actually with the first castaway, and that was my guinea pig. His name was Christopher Brown, and he was the director of the Ashmolean, the world's first public museum. And it was under him that the buildings were transformed, but it was also under him that the culture of the place was changed and transformed. Before, all the apartments had been kind of hermetically sealed, as if ideas did not travel between east and west and east. So when he reorganised the collections with his deputy, Henry Chin, they organised it under crossing cultures, crossing times. So, bless him, he said yes. So he was my guinea pig. But you see, at that time, I was the arts and antiques writer for Oxfordshire Limited Edition and also for Weekend in the Oxford Times. So the first Castaway feature was really about the objects. And that was what Christopher talked about, the treasures of the Ashmolean. And his castaway choice was the Alfred jewel. That after a few months, it all began to evolve and became much more about the people than the objects. And so when Christopher retired, I suggested that he be the only castaway to be castaway twice. And at this time, we would talk about him. And his final castaway choice for that was Rembrandt's portrait of his father. And you can see that in the current exhibition at the Ashmolean, which of course you can only see online at the moment. And it was curated by Christopher. So, and his story is in this one, Oxford Castaways 3. So, because he said yes, it was not too difficult for me to persuade other directors of other museums. One of them was the director of the Oxford Museum of Natural History, and also another person who'd worked there for 20 years, and that was George McGavin, the entomologist. We talked about how that building, when it was new, was the location for one of the most famous debates in scientific history. Now, George really wanted to take the whole museum to Oxtopia, and I was very cruel. I said no. And so he had to settle for Fitzroy's barometer. Now, Captain Fitzroy came to that debate and said that he really regretted being the captain of the Beagle and taking Charles Darwin around the world. Now, because of my passion for art, you won't be surprised that there are artists on Oxtopia. There's one in particular that I think should interest you as Oxford guides, and his name is Wayman Hay. Now, to me, Wayman represents what I would like castaways to be. The castaways come from 5 continents, because this city not only influences our lives and has influenced the history of our country, but it sent out ripples around the world and also attracted talented people from all over the world, including Wayman, who comes from Manchuria. Now, Wayman was the artist in residence at the Ashmolean when Christopher was rebuilding it. And then he went on to be artist in residence at the Radcliffe Observatory Quarter. And that was the biggest project in 100 years to come up in the central part of Oxford. Now, the work he did there, he's put in a book called Tower of the Winds, and the cover is a fabulous picture of something he witnessed. One of the builders, when the building had just been finished, celebrated with a handstand. And to me, that represents town and gown. And Wayman represents inclusivity. Now, he also was artist in residence at the Western Library and had a small exhibition there when it reopened. And I was very privileged because he did the cover of the first Castaways book, which was the first 50 castaways. So what the cover was the island covered with all the inspirational objects that the 50 castaways had chosen, and not one of them was practical. So whether or not the castaways might use some of those rather fabulous works of art to build a shelter, well, I'll never know. But I know that Colin Dexter suggested that the 4th century Greek bell crater could be used to collect rainwater. For me, Oxford is the Hollywood of stories. And that could be for you too, because I'm sure you've led lots of tours to do with the Inklings and to do with that wonderful creation of Colin Dexter, Inspector Morse, who of course loved opera and crosswords just like its creator. And I've actually cast away 2 of the greatest crossword compilers in the world. That was Colin and Don Manley. Of course, that 3rd crossword compiler was actually Geoffrey Morse at All Souls, who inspired the name of Colin's detective. Now, Don Manley organised the memorial service to his friend and rival, Colin Dexter. It was quite unforgettable. My last picture of Colin was at a Castaways kind of fun event. It's almost as if they'd become a club. Now, I've also cast away lots of writers. And one that I like was the late Brian Aldiss. And I think often chance encounters change lives. And it certainly did Brian's. He came to Oxford at the end of the war on an unattended day trip. And something made him walk into Saunders on the high street. And those few steps changed his life. So I've been talking mostly about men, and some of them, I'm sorry to say, men who are no longer with us. In fact, I did cast away lots of younger people too, the youngest being 29. But a third of the castaways are women. Now, one of them, or two of them I should say, Tish Francis and Kim Pickett, are the passion, the vision behind the Story Museum. Without them, it wouldn't have happened. It's very sad that they, after struggling so hard to get the final money to finish it, that it wasn't able to open on April the 4th. And of course, Tish has had an enormous effect on this city, and you might not even know her name, but she was the director of the Playhouse, a very fabulously time with fabulous actors, and also saving it from possibly extinction at the time. There's a very famous woman who lives in Iffley, and she is folk royalty, and her name is Peggy Seeger. Now, the intrepid musician, it may not be quite as famous as her brother Pete, who, of course, performed at Obama's inauguration, but she's made her mark around the world. I just loved the story she told me as a young woman traveling from the East Coast of America to Chicago on a Vetta, much to the amusement of police officers who'd never seen one. In fact, her life would make the most fabulous film. And I had the privilege of making a short video with her when we both rode in an Oxfordshire-made Morris Minor. And coming out of the radio was the wonderful melodic sound of another castaway, Bill Heiner. Now, of course, you will all know Bill from not only Radio Oxford, but also from the Shark House. And I not only cast away Bill, but I also cast away the artist who made that shark, who I believe is a very underestimated artist, John Buckley. Now, in the film too, we made it for KOA when we were fundraising for a charity called the Children's Radio Foundation. And at that time, the director was the Reverend Charlotte Bannister Parker. So if you do look at the video, you may even want just to fast forward to the interview between Bill and Charlotte. But Charlotte, like her father, Roger, represents town and gown. She bridges them both. And she is the associate priest at St Mary the Virgin Church on the High Street. But she also was the founder of the Faith Walk, which every June starts at the synagogue. Then everyone walks to St Giles, where the choir comes out, and then on to her church, St Mary's, where the Indian representatives of the Indian religions chant. And then it ends up at the mosque in East Oxford for supper. So women priests are pretty recent, but so too, of course, are female leaders of colleges. And it wasn't always easy for them. So Dame Jessica Lawson was the first female warden of Merton College, which was founded in 1264. Now in 1994, when she was appointed, along with two other women to old colleges, one national paper reported, "Women free, men glum." So her portrait is one of the very few portraits that you'll be showing your tourists in old colleges. So my castaways are, I hope, of most age groups, most skin tones, most backgrounds, most religions, and none. The people who make a mark on our city and county are not all white. Newton Daly was the director of the Pegasus Youth Theatre for 21 years. And it really was a struggle for him to raise money to change what were really quite poor temporary buildings into a purpose-built theatre for young people, not from the most privileged backgrounds. And he is retired now from that post, but he's a performance poet, an actor, and a director. And with his partner, Yasmin Sidwar, has started the Mandala Theatre, which is for young, really for very disadvantaged young people's issues. One of those kind of disadvantaged people who have been cast away was born as subsistence farmers in Jamaica, and her name is Icoline Smith. She came to Oxford in 1965, but when her husband died, she had to do 3 jobs just to keep her family afloat. Despite that, with no money, no savings, she started the Cowley Road Soup Kitchen. And it's still going every Wednesday and Saturday in the Asian Cultural Centre behind the mosque. And she, in her 80s, well into her 80s, still cooks. Nancy Mundenier Hunt, I believe, deserved the award that she was given in 2015 for being the most inspirational woman by Nat West. And I've had the privilege to recently write a novel with her, which we called Not So Black and White. And really it's inspired by her life experiences and how she's transformed the lives of very disadvantaged young people in Oxfordshire and in West Kenya. So I started at St Thomas's and Jericho, and I'd like to return there. And I would like you to imagine walking down Cranham Street, and you come to a building that was once a pub and been converted into housing by a green architect called Ray Fogg. And it has a sign on it saying that it's the most energy efficient house in Oxford. But when I cast away Ray, the editor then, Tim Metcalf, who was also a sheep farmer, gave it the title My Beautiful Careers, because Ray's had, I think now 6 careers, and all of them successful. He is, however, most famous for stealing Dylan from Woodstock. That's Bob Dylan. So with his brothers, he organised the iconic first Isle of Wight festivals, the 1969 with Bob Dylan, and then the last great event for Jimi Hendrix and in 1970, which actually led to an act of parliament because just too many people went. So that last book of memoir that Ray wrote, he launched appropriately at the Hendrix and Handel Museum in London in Mayfair. But the first one, the Stealing Dylan from Woodstock, I was very privileged to compare when he launched it in Blackwell. So, with Ray and James Harrison, who published Oxford Castaways 2 and 3, and Andy Seven, we've actually organised the first Oxford Indie Book Fair, and it was meant to take place on April the 4th. Now we're hoping that it will now take place on November the 21st, and one of the exhibitors who's also one like Castaways, Mark Davis, is a local historian, and he's written about that area, about the castle, the canal, and Wesley Memorial. So Mark Davis lives in a houseboat called Bill the Lizard, and it's moored on that hidden gem, the Oxford Canal. So Mark has also told the story, a town story of the first Englishman to fly in a balloon, James Sadler, who of course was an Oxford pastry cook and a very brilliant man, and I think one is not talked about quite enough. So I'd like to finish with another female castaway. East Oxford resident Zoe Broughton is someone who quietly makes history. As a young woman, she went undercover at Huntington Life Sciences and recorded not just the cruelty to animals, but the poor science. And that led to a full Home Office inquiry, and also to the first successful prosecution of a lab technician for animal cruelty. She also investigated conditions in battery farms here in Oxfordshire, and that led and influenced legislation to try and improve conditions. Now, the reason I'm giving this lecture like this on a screen and not face to face is because of COVID-19. And I do believe that this has shown us that we share one small world and that we are all interconnected. And that makes Zoe's current work particularly important and relevant because she is the video journalist for Extinction Rebellion. She has, however, done quite a lot of Oxford community films, and one of them was set in Beechcroft Road. So if you head north and you walk down Beechcroft Road, you can remember the time it was turned into a lounge.
And watched it develop from a little tiny seed into a great big crazy plant. And it's wonderful. I love all the glitter and the fireworks and the plant. It's all crazy. When it comes to community projects, too much talk about process, and everybody goes, that's very nice, and we're all empowered, but so what? You know, where's the result? Where's the practical bit?
I'm a friend of Ted's, and I also worry about Ted a lot because he keeps going over the top and getting involved in the most ridiculous things. And every once in a while, he does something that's really spectacular.
So one householder has taken matters into his own hands.
I'm tied to you, you're tied to me.
We'd set up a living room in the middle of the street.
Sometimes got to switch out of I'm driving down a main road to, this is a residential street. I need to slow down and become more aware of my surroundings.
It turned into a real festive time and the kids went wild.
And that was a really joyful film. Now, when it's all over, I think we'll all want to celebrate. And maybe someone who can inspire us is former Oxford food writer, Helen Peacock, who made 2 huge birthday cakes for Winnie the Witch, the illustrator of which, of course, is Oxford resident and Castaway, Zimbabwean-born Corky Paul. Now, the tall cake is in the Story Museum, but I paid her to make a second, slightly smaller one to present to Corky when we made him honorary life president of Kennington Library for helping us to save all 20 Oxfordshire libraries when they were threatened with closure. Now, Helen, for her 70th birthday, decided to celebrate in a hot air balloon, rather like James Sadler. And she floated over Oxford, where she looked down and she could see that town and gown are united. We're one. And hopefully this wonderful influence that Oxford has in the whole world will help us to feel that we are all united. So while you're in lockdown, I hope that you might like to dip in and out of Oxford Castaways 2 and Oxford Castaways 3, and read about the lives of some people who are famous, some not famous, but all of whom have had an influence on our city. Thank you so much for listening, and keep safe.
These days are the good old days, right here, right now, in front of our faces.